I need to see your papers, proof of status, now.
I'm a U.S. citizen. Head nurse at Mercy General. I'm waiting for the bus.
Not a debate. ID or you're going in cuffs for obstruction.
Then say it on camera. You're arresting an American nurse for standing at a bus stop.
The dashcam mounted on the dashboard of the unmarked government SUV captured the entire scene in high definition, recording the crisp morning air and the silence of the suburban street before the chaos began. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of morning that feels crisp and full of purpose. Officer Kyle Vance, 29 years old and eager to make a name for himself within the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, had absolutely no idea that the woman he was eyeing through his windshield was not a person of interest, but a pillar of the community. Sarah Jenkins, 54, was standing at the bus stop, just as she had for the past 15 years. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't hiding. She was the head nurse of the trauma unit at Mercy General Hospital, a woman who had managed mass casualty events and trained hundreds of nurses. She was a fourth-generation American born in Cleveland, Ohio, to a father who was a chaotic Korean War veteran and a mother who taught civics. Sarah was dressed in her navy blue scrubs, a heavy cardigan against the chill, and her hospital ID clipped prominently to her chest. She was checking her watch, calculating the minutes until the number 42 bus would arrive to take her to a shift where 3 critical patients were waiting for her specific care. Kyle Vance saw none of that history. He didn't see the fatigue of a woman who had worked a double shift 2 days prior. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a quota. He saw a black woman standing alone at a bus stop in a neighborhood that had seen a recent influx of undocumented laborers, and he decided, based on nothing but his own ambition and bias, that she didn't belong. Vance had been on the task force for 18 months. He was aggressive, often reprimanded for his tone, but praised for his numbers. He parked his SUV illegally in the red zone, the tires crunching against the curb, and stepped out. He adjusted his tactical vest, checked the placement of his weapon not drawn but ready, and approached the bus stop with a swagger that betrayed his youth and his arrogance. Sarah heard the heavy boots on the pavement and turned her head slightly. She saw the uniform, the bold police patch that ICE agents often wear to project authority and the aggressive stance. She didn't flinch. She had raised 3 sons in America. She knew exactly how to stand when law enforcement approached. She kept her hands visible, clasping her tote bag loosely. She expected him to walk past her, perhaps to the convenience store on the corner. Instead, Vance stopped 3 feet in front of her, blocking her view of the street. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough to startle a few pigeons nearby. "I need to see your papers regarding your status in the United States." Sarah stared at him. The question was so absurd, so blatantly unconstitutional given the context that she blinked. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice calm, the voice she used to soothe panicked relatives in the ER. "I am waiting for the bus to go to work. I'm a nurse." Vance smirked a dismissal that would later be played on loop for a federal jury. "I didn't ask for your job history. I asked for proof of citizenship or legal residency. We're conducting an enforcement operation in this area." Sarah squared her shoulders. She knew the law. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Know your rights, or you have none." "Officer," Sarah said, reading the name tag on his vest. "Officer Vance. I am standing on a public sidewalk. I am not committing a crime. I am not acting suspiciously. You cannot demand my identification or proof of citizenship without reasonable suspicion that I am in the country illegally. Simply standing at a bus stop while black is not reasonable suspicion." Vance's face tightened. He wasn't used to being quoted case law by women at bus stops. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. "I have broad authority to investigate immigration violations," Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "Now you can either produce a green card, a passport, or an ID, or we can do this the hard way." Sarah didn't back down. "I am a United States citizen born in Ohio. I don't carry my passport to the hospital. My driver's license is in my wallet, but I am under no legal obligation to show it to you for a consensual encounter. Are you detaining me?" The air between them crackled with tension. A young man walking his dog across the street stopped, sensing the trouble, and pulled out his phone. Vance noticed the witness but didn't care. He was committed now. His ego had taken the wheel. "Yes," Vance lied, his voice dropping to a growl. "I am detaining you. I have reason to believe you are a foreign national attempting to evade detection. Now show me ID or you're going in cuffs." Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "You are making a mistake, Officer Vance. A Fourth Amendment violation that is going to cost you dearly. I am the head nurse at Mercy General. This badge," she tapped her chest, "is government issued for medical clearance. But if you want to arrest an American citizen for waiting for the bus, you go right ahead, but you better be ready for what comes next." Vance didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. The pain shot up her shoulder, but she didn't scream. She gritted her teeth. "Turn around!" Vance shouted, playing to an audience that wasn't there trying to justify his aggression. "Stop resisting!" "I am not resisting," Sarah said clearly, speaking for the camera she hoped was watching, speaking for the young man across the street filming. "I am complying under duress. You are hurting my shoulder." Vance slapped the cuffs on her wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. He marched her toward the SUV just as the number 42 bus turned the corner. Sarah watched it approach. She saw the driver, a man she waved to every morning, slow down and look with wide eyes as his regular passenger was shoved against the side of a law enforcement vehicle. She thought of her patients. Mr. Henderson needed his dressing changed at 8 a.m. sharp. The trauma bay needed her inventory check. She wasn't just losing her freedom. She was being stripped of her duty. "You have no idea what you're doing," Sarah said quietly as Vance patted her down, his hands searching her scrub pockets. He pulled out her phone and her wallet. "I'm doing my job," Vance retorted, opening the back door of the caged vehicle. "Maybe next time you'll cooperate instead of acting like a lawyer." He shoved her inside. The seat was hard plastic, designed to be uncomfortable. The cage mesh separated her from the front. Vance slammed the door, sealing her in. He walked around to the driver's seat, tossed her bag on the passenger seat, and started the engine. He didn't check her wallet. He didn't look at her ID. He was so convinced of his own intuition, so blinded by the profile he had constructed in his head, that he didn't bother to verify the very thing he had arrested her for. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch Unit 4 Alpha, 1 female in custody, non-cooperative, transporting to processing." Sarah sat in the back, her hands numb from the tight cuffs. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She controlled her heart rate. Panic was the enemy. Detail was her ally. She memorized the time, 7:22 a.m. She memorized the route he was taking. She listened to him humming along to the radio, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just kidnapped a U.S. citizen. She thought about her son Marcus, who was a corporate attorney in Chicago. She thought about the lectures she gave to student nurses about documentation. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. She would write this down. She would write every second of it down. The drive took 20 minutes. Vance drove aggressively, weaving through traffic using his siren simply to bypass red lights. When they pulled into the DHS processing center, Sarah felt a cold resolve settle over her bones. They had taken her dignity, but they would pay for it. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rolling down behind them. He hauled Sarah out of the vehicle. Her shoulders ached and her wrists were chafing, but she held her head high. He marched her into the intake area, a sterile room filled with fluorescent light and the smell of industrial cleaner and despair. There were other officers there drinking coffee, reviewing files. They looked up as Vance brought her in. Sarah saw the confusion in their eyes. They saw a woman in expensive nursing scrubs, well-groomed posture, perfect in handcuffs. It didn't fit the usual narrative. Vance shoved her toward the intake desk where a desk sergeant named Mike sat. Mike was 58, a 30-year veteran of Border Patrol and immigration. He had seen it all. He had tired eyes and a hairline that had retreated decades ago. He looked at Vance, then at Sarah. "What do we have here, Kyle?" Mike asked, his voice gravelly. "Subject refused to identify," Vance said, puffing out his chest. "Suspected illegal entry, resisting detention, possible visa overstay." Mike looked at Sarah. He saw the fire in her eyes, but also the calm. He saw the hospital badge. "Ma'am?" Mike asked. "I am Sarah Jenkins," she said clearly. "I am a United States citizen. I was kidnapped from a bus stop by this officer while on my way to work at Mercy General Hospital. I have my driver's license, my hospital credentials, and my voter registration card in my wallet, which Officer Vance seized but refused to look at." The room went silent. The hum of the computer fans seemed to get louder. Mike looked at Vance. "You didn't check her wallet?" Vance scoffed. "She was non-compliant, Mike. She started quoting the Fourth Amendment. You know the type. Usually means they're hiding something." Mike didn't answer. He reached for the plastic bag Vance had thrown on the counter. He opened it and pulled out Sarah's wallet. It was a nice wallet, leather well worn. He flipped it open. The first thing he saw was a California Real ID with a gold star in the corner. Sarah Louise Jenkins. Born Cleveland, Ohio. He pulled it out. He checked the hologram. It was real. He dug deeper. A folded paper, her voter registration card. A membership card for the American Nurses Association. A debit card from a major bank. Mike felt a pit open in his stomach. He looked up at Vance, his expression turning from weary to horrified. "Kyle," Mike said, his voice low. "Did you run her name?" "System was slow," Vance lied. "I figured I'd do it here." "She's American, you idiot," Mike whispered, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a shout. "She's not just a citizen. She's got a real ID. She's a head nurse." Vance's face went pale, then red. "She could be using fraudulent docs. The behavior was suspicious." "The behavior?" Sarah cut in. "You mean waiting for the bus, or asking you for your probable cause?" Mike stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Sarah. "Uncuff her. Now." Vance hesitated. "Sarge, if we uncuff her without processing—" "Uncuff her!" Mike roared. The sound bounced off the concrete walls. Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Sarah rubbed her wrists. There were deep red, angry marks where the metal had dug in. She didn't say thank you. She looked at Mike. "I want a supervisor. The field director. Now." "Ma'am, we can resolve this." Vance started. "You remain silent," Sarah commanded. She didn't shout, but her voice had the authority of a woman who told surgeons when to cut. Vance snapped his mouth shut. Mike was already on the phone. "Get the director down here. Yes, now. We have a situation. Capital S." The minutes that followed were excruciating for the officers. Sarah stood in the center of the room. She refused to sit. She refused water. She just stood there, rubbing her wrists, staring at the Great Seal of the United States on the wall. 5 minutes later, Field Director Thomas Reynolds burst through the doors. He was a man in a suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He took one look at Sarah, one look at the shame-faced Vance, and he knew. "Ms. Jenkins," Reynolds said, approaching her with his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "I am Director Reynolds. I am incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding. We are going to get you a car to take you to work immediately. We will expunge the arrest record. This was a terrible mistake." Sarah looked at him. "Dad, a mistake is forgetting your keys, Director. This was a violation of my civil rights, false imprisonment, and assault. And I'm not going anywhere until I have copies of the incident report, the body cam footage log, and the dash cam footage preserved." Reynolds blinked. "Ma'am, we can't release evidence without a subpoena." "Then I suggest you prepare for one," Sarah said, Because my son is an attorney, and by the time I get to the hospital, he will have filed an emergency injunction to preserve every second of tape you have. If 1 minute of that footage goes missing, I will own this building." She turned to Vance. He was staring at his boots. "Look at me," she said. Vance looked up. He looked like a child caught stealing. "You saw a black woman, and you turned off your brain. You assumed I was less than you. You assumed I had no rights. You were wrong, and I am going to make sure you never wear a badge again." Sarah accepted the ride to the hospital, but not in a police car. She demanded a town car service billed to the agency. She arrived at work 2 hours late. She walked into the trauma unit. Her wrists bruised her spirit, furious. She worked her shift. She saved lives. And on her breaks, she documented everything. The lawsuit was filed 4 days later. Jenkins versus Vance et al. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a manifesto. It listed 7 constitutional violations. It cited Terry versus Ohio and United States versus Brignoni-Ponce. It demanded jury trial. The Department of Justice tried to settle immediately. They offered $500,000. Sarah's lawyer, a shark named David Sterling, who specialized in 1983 civil rights claims, laughed at them. "My client was kidnapped by the federal government," Sterling told the press. "She doesn't want $500,000. She wants justice." The video from the bystander across the street hit the internet the same week. It was titled, "Nurse versus ICE." It showed Sarah dignified and calm being manhandled by Vance. It showed the moment the cuffs clicked. It showed the bus leaving. The views skyrocketed. 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. The comments section was a war zone, but the overwhelming sentiment was rage. People shared their own stories. Nurses posted photos of themselves in scrubs with the hashtag not suspicious. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal for the agency. Sterling subpoenaed Vance's disciplinary records. They found a pattern. Vance had stopped 42 people in the last year. 38 were Hispanic or black. Only 3 had resulted in valid arrests. The rest were catch-and-release harassment. He was a predator with a badge, and his supervisors had looked the other way because he met quotas. The agency had known. That was the key. They had known he was profiling, and they had promoted him. The trial took place 18 months later in a federal district court. The courtroom was packed. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table wearing her Sunday best, looking every inch the matriarch she was. Vance sat with the defense, looking smaller, younger, and terrified. When Sarah took the stand, you could hear a pin drop. She described the fear not for herself, but for the country. "I was born here," she told the jury, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "My father fought for this country. I save American lives every day, and in that moment none of it mattered. To him, I was just a body to be processed. If it can happen to me in my uniform on my way to serve my community, it can happen to anyone." The defense tried to argue qualified immunity. They tried to argue that Vance made an honest mistake of fact. But the video destroyed them. The dashcam footage which Sarah had ensured was preserved showed Vance's aggressive approach. It recorded the audio clearly. It captured his sneer. It captured Sarah offering her ID and him refusing it. There was no mistake. It was willful. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a retired schoolteacher, read the verdict with a steady voice. They found for the plaintiff on all counts: unlawful seizure, excessive force, false arrest, violation of equal protection. Then came the numbers. Compensatory damages $1.8 million for the trauma, the injury to her wrists, and the violation of her rights. But it was the punitive damages that made the courtroom gasp. The jury wanted to send a message. They awarded $5 million in punitive damages against the agency and the officer personally, though the agency would indemnify him. Total verdict, $6.8 million. It was one of the largest individual awards for an unlawful stop in the district's history. Sarah closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for nearly 2 years. It wasn't about the money. It was about the statement. The aftermath was swift. Kyle Vance was terminated 3 weeks after the verdict. The sheer size of the payout and the public embarrassment made him a liability the agency could no longer protect. He was stripped of his credentials and placed on a do-not-hire list for federal law enforcement. The last anyone heard, he was working construction in another state. But the victory went beyond one bad apple. As part of the post-trial injunctive relief, the agency was forced to overhaul its consensual encounter policies. They were required to implement mandatory training on implicit bias, specifically regarding the assumption of citizenship based on race. Sarah Jenkins returned to her life, but she was different. She was a hero to her neighbors, a legend in the hospital. She took the money, the $6.8 million, and she didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy a luxury car. She established the Jenkins Legal Defense Fund for essential workers who had been targeted by law enforcement. She set up scholarships for minority nursing students at the local college. She ensured that her trauma became a ladder for others to climb. Years later, Sarah still waits at that same bus stop. She still wears her Navy scrubs. But now, when a police cruiser drives by, they slow down. The officers wave respectfully. They know who she is. They know that the woman standing there isn't just a nurse. She is a force of nature who reminded the United States government that the Constitution applies to everyone everywhere, even at a bus stop at 7:15 in the morning. This story is a reminder that freedom is fragile. It resides not in the paper of the Constitution, but in the courage of citizens willing to stand up and demand it be respected. Sarah Jenkins had the knowledge, the resources, and the will to fight back, but how many others don't? How many silent settlements are signed? How many apologies are never given? If this story moved you, if it made you angry or proud, I need you to do something. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged by authority figures based on how you look, and do you think the $6.8 million verdict was enough to teach the system a lesson? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories of the voiceless, the fighters, and the truth. Until next time, stay safe, know your rights, and never let them silence you.